My favorite thing about the NFL preseason is that it gives me the last opportunity to watch some of my favorite college football players play football for probably the last time in their professional careers, unless they play in the UFL. And I want to give you guys a couple of forgotten college football players that were stars at the collegiate level that you can watch play this preseason. We're going to start off with Detroit Lions quarterback Hendon Hooker. If you're a Tennessee fan, you remember Hendon Hooker. He should have won the Heisman Trophy his final season at UT, but he got injured and tore his ACL against South Carolina and the Beamer Boys. And not only did that ruin Tennessee's dream season, but it also tanked Hendon Hooker's draft stock, because before he suffered that ACL injury, he was projected to be a first-round pick. Well, he ends up falling all the way to the third round, and he gets drafted by the Detroit Lions, which really pissed me off at the time because I knew that he was never going to get the opportunity to compete for the starting job in Detroit. And right now, he's currently battling for the right to be their backup quarterback. But when he was playing for Tennessee, this dude was a prolific quarterback. He had one of the best touchdown interception ratios in America his 2 years at Tennessee. 58 TDs, only 5 interceptions. It's absolutely insanity. In 2022, he was SEC Offensive Player of the Year. He also was a second team All-American. I mean, Hendon Hooker, this preseason, this is going to be our first look at him in the NFL, because last year was pretty much a redshirt season for him. And he did come and be a part of the active roster at some point last year, but he didn't get any action in games. So I'm really excited to see what we're going to see out of Hendon Hooker in the preseason this year. Another guy that a lot of you guys forgotten about that you're going to see a lot of this preseason is Patriots cornerback Shaun. Now, at Ohio State, going into the 2020 season, he was projected to be a first-round pick because a lot of people thought that he was going to come out in 2019, but he ended up staying for one more year, and he had somewhat of a down season. But he still was an All-American that year. He had 91 total tackles, 25 pass breakups, and 6 interceptions during his career with the Buckeyes. But with his 2020 season being such a disappointment compared to what he put on film the year prior, him coming back for an extra year did him a disservice, and he went from being a projected late first-round pick to being a fifth-round selection by the Baltimore Ravens. And then, weirdly enough, they ended up trading him during the final week of the preseason that same offseason to the New England Patriots. And you normally don't see rookies get traded at all, especially before the season begins. So that kind of was a little bit of a red flag. And ever since he's been on the Patriots, haven't heard from this dude. Only seen him on a couple of tackles, like about 2 or 3 plays from last year. And this is going to be a really big preseason for him, because if he doesn't perform well, he could end up getting cut and not making their 53-man roster. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what Shaun does this preseason. He was one of the best cornerbacks in college football during his time with Ohio State. Physical, really good tackler, really good in press coverage when he was coming out of OSU, but we haven't really seen his skill set translate to the next level. And he was supposed to be one of those hybrid guys who could play either safety or slot cornerback. And right now, nobody really knows what role he can play in this league outside of being a contributor on special teams. How about the midget sensation, Duece Vaughn? This man is 5'6", 176 pounds, but don't let the size fool you, because at Kansas State, this dude could not be stopped. He leads Kansas State all time for receiving yards and rushing yards for a running back. Okay, this dude was a consensus All-American his final season at Kansas State as well. And he's second all time in rushing yards for his career at the University of Kansas State. My bad for butchering that earlier. And despite his size, you know, he's way stronger than somebody you would think is only 5'6", 5'7", and weighs as much as what he weighs, but he has really good upper body strength. He's really good of finding ways to get extra yardage after contact. And we only saw him play sparingly for the Dallas Cowboys last year. Most of the times it was when they were blowing out teams and he got to come in on mop-up duty. But this preseason, not only is he competing for a role on this team with the big question mark that the Cowboys have at running back this year, but he's also competing for a spot on the final roster, because there's a good chance that he also could be a roster cut too, because he only was a 6th-round pick. And a large reason why the Cowboys drafted him was because his dad was on the roster. Now, I thought that he could potentially be a better version of what Darren Sproles is. He's able to find a way to get extra yards through contact despite him playing in a league that's full of giants compared to him. He has really good hands coming out of the backfield. He's a really good route runner, but when you're this small, you really have to be a different kind of athlete to be able to sustain playing at this level. And Duece Vaughn may be better suited for the UFL than what he is the NFL, but I'm surprised Dallas hasn't really given him the opportunity to return kicks. I know they got Kevontae Turpin down there, but Duece Vaughn also, with the new kickoff rule, I think this is somebody who you definitely would like to give a look to, with him having really good vision. I mean, if Duece Vaughn was 5'10 and 205 pounds, he would have been a first-round pick with the skill set he had coming out of Kansas State. But with how small he is, having the durability concerns, and plus, he's only limited to a certain amount of things he can do, because you're not about to run power or inside zone with a guy like Duece Vaughn, because you don't want him taking the kind of punishment that he would receive running the football up the middle when you have these 300-plus defensive linemen and these 230, 240-pound linebackers piling on top of him. So this is going to be a really critical preseason for Duece Vaughn. But when he was at Kansas State, man, this dude was absolutely dynamite. He had over 1,500 rushing yards his final season at K-State. Year before that, he went for 1,400, had over 20 total touchdowns. This dude was an absolute stud when he was playing for the Wildcats. And he's one of my favorite college football players of this past decade. Another running back that we have is Washington Commanders RB Chris Rodriguez. This was one of college football's most productive running backs during his time at the University of Kentucky. He's third all-time in Wildcats history with He's third all-time in rushing yards in Kentucky program history. He was second in total touchdowns. He played for Kentucky from 2018 to 2022. He was a 6th-round selection by the Commanders last year, and he actually had a decent rookie season when they actually gave him some touches. He had 247 rushing yards. He was averaging nearly 5 yards per pop, and he had 2 touchdowns as well. And if he can find a way to phase out Austin Eckler, he could be a really good 1-2 punch with Brian Robinson. Brian Robinson is a similar style runner to what Chris Rodriguez is. Really physical, isn't somebody that's going to make you miss in the open field with his elusiveness, but he can power through you. The only difference is that he's a tad bit slower than what Brian Robinson is, and he doesn't have the kind of acceleration that Brian Robinson has when he ends up getting the handoff. But this is your old school throwback power back where you need to get an inch or two, or you're in 3rd and 2, 3rd and 1, or you're in the goal line situation, 3rd and goal, 4th and goal. You need to punch it in. You're looking for a smacker. Chris Rodriguez is definitely that guy, and he definitely is somebody who could be really good in a complimentary role behind a guy like Brian Robinson. And during his time in Kentucky, man, he was a force to be reckoned with. He was one of the better running backs in the SEC. I'm a big SEC fan due to me growing up in the South. And I was always really entertained every time I watched Chris Rodriguez play for the University of Kentucky. Now, we got another defensive player on this list. A lot of you guys should know who this guy is. Edge rusher for the Baltimore Ravens, David Ojabo, man. He was part of that Michigan team with Hendon Hutchinson that turned around the program and started their 3 years of dominance over the Big Ten. And he was supposed to be a first-round pick when he was coming out of the 2022 NFL draft. Some people had him expected to go as high as top 15 in that draft. But unfortunately, a few weeks leading up to that draft, he ended up tearing his Achilles during his pro day at Michigan, which lowered his draft stock. He went to the second round of Baltimore. He didn't really see any action during his rookie season because he still was recovering from that Achilles injury. So that was a redshirt year for him. And then he came in 2023. I believe he started against the Houston Texans. He had a strip sack fumble on C.J. Stroud. And then week 3, he got injured again last year. He had a partially torn ACL. Some people thought that he would have been able to come back at some point last year, but eventually later on during the season, the Ravens just shut him down and said that he's not going to be able to play again. And going into 2024, he has a really good chance to establish himself as the top pass rusher on that Ravens defense, which is why this preseason is going to be so important for him, because we haven't really seen a lot of him in football action. He hasn't really played a lot in the preseason his last couple of years neither. So this is really a good chance for him to really get back to the player that he was prior to sustaining these past 2 injuries, the partially torn ACL, the torn Achilles in 2022. And at Michigan, this dude was an absolute freak show. This dude was damn near unblockable along with Hendon Hutchinson, had a really quick first step. He had 11 tackles for loss. He had 11 sacks as well. He was a second-team All-American. He set Michigan's single-season program record for forced fumbles with 5. So there is a lot of upside with David Ojabo that still can be reached despite the injuries that he has had to deal with. And I really believe that he can become really productive in this league. He may not be a double-digit sack guy, but he definitely is somebody that can give you 7, 8 sacks a year, be a really good rotational pass rusher for you as well if he can stay healthy. So definitely keep your eyes on David Ojabo, edge rusher, pass rusher for the Baltimore Ravens. The story of Justyn Ross is one of the saddest that I can recall in recent memory. I remember it was the 2018 college football playoffs, right? And you got this true freshman wide receiver for Clemson who absolutely just torched Notre Dame in the semifinal round. He had 6 catches for 148 receiving yards and 2 receiving touchdowns as well. And then against Alabama, he had an encore performance. He had 6 receptions, 153 receiving yards, and a touchdown grab in Clemson's blowout win against Bama in that national championship game. And you was expecting Justyn Ross to become the next superstar wide receiver at Clemson, because at this point, Clemson had a strong claim to be wide receiver U, because they were pumping up guys to the NFL like it was nothing. You had Sammy Watkins, Martavis Bryant, and then you recently had the dude who plays for the Bengals, T. Higgins. I mean, they were on an incredible run of really productive wide receivers. And you thought that Justyn Ross was going to become the best of them, similar to JSN. When he went into his final season at Ohio State before he got injured, there were people who were going to say that he could have been the best wide receiver Ohio State ever had in terms of talent. But Justyn Ross, similar to JSN, he had a big injury that derailed his 3rd season at Clemson, because his sophomore season at Clemson was pretty good. Although it wasn't as good as what you were hoping for, he still was pretty impressive. But then in 2020, he had to miss his entire 3rd season due to a spinal surgery that kept him from playing that year. And once he came back the following season, which was really crazy because some people thought after he had to go through with this procedure, it was going to be it for his playing career. But he comes back, and it wasn't the same Justyn Ross that we saw terrorize Notre Dame and Alabama during the college football playoffs. And that caused him to go undrafted. And he ended up getting signed by the Kansas City Chiefs as an undrafted rookie free agent in 2023. And if my memory serves me correctly, he got one of the highest paid contracts ever for an undrafted rookie free agent. And there were some large expectations placed upon him because there were a good amount of Chiefs fans who were hyping this dude up, and for a very good reason. You go back and you watch his dominance in the 2018 college football playoffs against the Fighting Irish and the Crimson Tide. Yeah, you definitely understand why so many people were hyped up about him and why there was so much disappointment when his career turned out the way that it did once he had to go through with that spinal procedure. And then even then, his rookie season, he didn't even get to play at all because he suffered a foot injury late during training camp, I believe. And, he came back in 2023 last season, and we only saw him have a handful of plays. So right now, the jury is still out on Justyn Ross. I still believe that he can end up being a really productive receiver in this league. And he always gets a lot of attention throughout training camp for Kansas City. Like, I was reading a couple reports earlier that was saying that Justyn Ross is making a lot of big plays, but you're not about to fool me twice again with the Justyn Ross hype. I still believe he can become really productive, but I strongly doubt that he's ever going to develop into that superstar wideout that we thought he would become when he was torching Notre Dame and Alabama in the 2018 college football playoffs. But when he was at his peak, man, everybody who was watching Clemson football at one point thought this dude was really going to be the one for them at that position. And the last guy we got to talk about, man, the mailman Stetson Bennett. This man's story at Georgia is something that you would see in a Disney movie. He first had to walk on at Georgia because he was under-recruited coming out of high school because he was undersized. People didn't really think he had good enough arm strength to be a college football quarterback at a high level. But the reason why he walked on at Georgia was because he had a few family members who graduated from the university. And then he walks on at Georgia. He ends up transferring, going to JUCO. Then a year after, Kirby Smart offers him a scholarship to come back on the team. And even then, it was still a long shot for Stetson Bennett to become the starter for Georgia because at that time, when he came back, you had Jamie Newman, you had JT Daniels, you had some guy named DeJuan Mathis, and he was pretty much the fourth, fifth string quarterback at that point. But then Jamie Newman ends up opting out, which was a huge mistake on his behalf. JT Daniels ends up getting injured. And then all of a sudden, the mailman Stetson Bennett, he delivers Georgia to 2 back-to-back national titles. And what's so funny is that the first national championship that Georgia won under Kirby Smart, a lot of Bulldogs fans will swear to you that the best quarterback didn't lead them to that national championship. And then there were a lot of people who were doubting Georgia again because of Stetson Bennett, despite how well he played and led them to a national championship. So he had to double back and go do it again. Regardless of how Stetson Bennett's NFL career pans out, this dude is a legend in the state of Georgia. The Georgia Bulldogs, in my opinion, should get a statue built outside of their stadium of Stetson Bennett. Because who would have thought that this walk-on quarterback who was undersized, small, would end up being the one to get Kirby Smart his first championship gold at Georgia? This is some Disney movie kind of shit that we saw with Stetson Bennett at Georgia. He also was a Heisman finalist, although some people questioned just how deserving he was to receive a trip to New York, especially over Hendon Hooker, who was balling out that year. And I always believed that Stetson Bennett was going to be a really good quarterback at the NFL level, at least a really good backup, because he has a really similar playing style to Brock Purdy. Not incredibly athletic, but he has enough wiggle where he can pick up a few yards with his legs. He also can buy time for guys to get open. He has really good anticipation, pretty good accuracy, reads defenses pretty well. And he was a 4th-round selection by the Rams in 2023, which kind of surprised me. And then he missed all of last year due to mental health issues. So we hope that everything's going well with him mentally. And right now, he's competing with Jimmy Garoppolo for the right to be the second quarterback behind Matthew Stafford on the Rams this year. But a lot of people know about the legend that is the mailman Stetson Bennett, man. He had one of the greatest stories in college football history. and I'm rooting for him. I'm really looking forward, out of all the guys on this list, to watch Stetson Bennett this preseason the most, man, because I got to see me some more of the mailman. His time at Georgia can't be the last time we hear of Stetson Bennett. And even if it doesn't work out in the NFL form, I'm pretty sure he'll end up being fantastic in the UFL if he ends up taking the opportunity.